All right, well, that is certainly not a future that we want. But another alternative exists. It's going to require a complete transformation of the economy, though, so that instead of prioritizing profits, we actually prioritize the needs of humanity and the planet. We can't continue down the same path that we're on, or we're literally going to become extinct. Fortunately, we are seeing the beginning of a movement that's starting to recognize that business as usual is going to lead to death for everyone. People around the world are beginning to call the climate emergency what it is and are refusing to be silent until that emergency gets taken seriously. So in March of this year, students began walking out of class, skipping school every Friday to strike for the climate. They called their action by their hashtag Fridays for Future because these young people recognized that if we don't act now, they're not going to have a future. And also, they're going to have to be the ones that act because those in charge have shown how useless they are. They're inspired by Greta Thunberg, a now 16-year-old Swedish student who started leaving school every Friday to draw attention to the scale of the climate emergency. According to her, why should we study for a future that is being taken away from us, that is being stolen for profit? On Friday the 20th, so just a couple weeks ago, we saw over 4 million people from 185 countries out in the streets, demanding that we take this crisis seriously. Over 6,100 actions on every continent, yes, including Antarctica, were taken to draw attention to the fact that we are not going to have a livable planet if we don't act. After all, scientists for decades have been warning us about the threat of climate change. And just last year, some of the most prominent scientists, like he was saying from the IPCC, gave us until 2030 before irreversible climate catastrophe happens. So while it is true that we do need to take this climate emergency seriously, we also need to realize what the obstacles to change are. Protesting to draw attention in the streets is a really great and inspiring start. We should definitely all be informed about the climate emergency and how disastrous our future will be if we don't do something. But this knowledge is only really useful if something meaningful is done with it. Some activists are calling on politicians to vote for changes that will curb emissions and slow the rate of climate change. After all, calling on politicians and other people in power is often the only option we're presented with when we want change. And honestly, it makes sense for the people who created the problem to actually fix it. And while it's great that people are trying to do something to protect the future, we've seen that politicians can't steer a new course. What we need is a complete end to and reversal of greenhouse gas emissions, and that would require a complete restructuring of the economy. So this would require a fundamental shift in pretty much every single part of our society. This is why every single president from 1965, LBJ, has known about the role fossil fuels play in changing the climate, yet absolutely none of them have actually done anything meaningful. In fact, under Obama, oil extraction increased, and we saw the largest expansion of fracking. Under Trump, the trend has continued. He's talked about wanting to start drilling in Antarctica. And we can only imagine more of the same, whether Democrat or Republican. And you may have also heard of the Green New Deal. It's an expansive resolution meant to shift the economy to green energy and provide living wage jobs for all. But a resolution is actually only just an idea. And in order to achieve its ideals, we're going to need an end to the political system as we know it, and an end to capitalism. Voting in ideas is not going to cut it. So what we truly need is not just people in the streets or even a new law, but systemic change, a social revolution. We need people in the streets to take that energy that they already have and apply it towards creating a new economy themselves, a harmonious economy that produces for the needs of all and not just the profits of a few. So this would mean an end to the overproduction of products that sometimes we don't even need, like what is a shake weight even, or cat costumes, or plastic water bottles, more realistically for us, which use up natural resources and create a lot of waste. This would also mean the end of products designed to break down, forcing you to buy more. And I'm sure most of us know a product called the iPhone. This would also mean the beginning of a planned international economy that uses only what is necessary, provides for everyone, and is designed to actually ensure that we have a future. Luckily, this idea has a name, and it's called socialism. So with the technologies that already exist, we have just a glimpse of the solutions that we're going to need to change our economy. But to get us to where we actually need to be, we're going to need new solutions still. The tech that we have now only exists because it is profitable. Research is only giving funding if companies think the research is a good investment opportunity. But imagine how many technological solutions we could have if we were driven by an effort to actually continue existing instead of make a profit in the short term. Life-saving solutions that don't exist now could actually be allowed to thrive. We could live in a fully sustainable world with transit designed to get people where they need to be efficiently and quickly, energy systems that power the world without polluting it, and agricultural systems that function to feed people nutritious food for generations to come. But this goal is not achievable so long as these technologies and methods have to also generate profit. And this is apparent by the response that we see today to natural disasters. Under capitalism, natural disasters become business opportunities for developers and tech companies, though only if these companies find that these investments are actually worthwhile and they're going to see a return. And since communities who are hardest hit by these disasters tend to be made up of poor and working people, they're often left permanently destroyed by such events. Their homes are never recovered, they're displaced, they don't receive adequate aid or care, and their livelihoods are just simply left to luck. 14 years later, we still see that New Orleans has not been fully recovered for working people. The rich over there are doing just fine. All the expensive hotels have been rebuilt. And more recently, we only saw small amounts of aid provided by the government to compensate people for their losses. Not enough for people to actually resume their lives. And that's also where you see a lot of these climate refugees, even within our own border. But you can bet that in times of crisis, the National Guard is there preventing people from looting, which is kind of what we call people just taking the supplies that they need to survive. So it's obvious that a socialist society is going to be needed to properly respond to disasters, where resources are given to rebuilding everyday people's homes and not just expensive places for the rich and tourists. These disasters are coming. That's not a question. But we're going to need a coordinated response, prioritizing those whose lives will be most affected. And we're going to have to actually, be able to rebuild amongst the destruction. There's a kernel, though, of what this response could look like. Despite a system that pits us against each other, in times of real need, humans are incredibly resourceful. So we need to prioritize and organize that response, but we shouldn't have to wait until a natural disaster hits. In fact, we should organize now to prevent future disasters from occurring and to prepare for the ones that are inevitable, since we know that the government can't, as we've seen. So it's probably pretty clear by now that we need a big planet-saving change, and sooner rather than later, which is still questionable if there is a later. And we need to take a look at our society to see who's capable of creating this change. Politicians won't fix things for us. And they've shown that over and over again. In fact, they can't fix things because that would require destroying the very system that they're elected to protect. So in order to achieve the systemic change we need, we'll need to harness the power of the people who actually make this society run. We'll need ordinary working people, not only to disrupt business as usual, but to reorganize it. We do the work everywhere and make every aspect of the society run, from manufacturing to transportation to the functioning of a hospital. The work we do has immense social power, and that power is going to be needed to transform our society. For example, we can't expect to shut down the fossil fuel industry without a leading role of the workers who actually work it. From miners to oil rig workers, pipeline builders to oil transporters, these are the people who make our current fossil fuel-based economy run, and thus they also have the power to stop it. The kind of movement we need has to include these workers. After all, who has the knowledge on how to shut down refineries or properly remove waste better than the workers themselves? Certainly not me. For too long, the environmental movement has pitted itself against energy workers, and workers' movements have considered environmentalists job killers. Both viewpoints lack a systemic understanding of the real problem. Workers can't see an end of these industries as an end to their livelihood, and eliminating destructive industries should not mean destroying workers' lives. They're not actually the problem. An economy that functions to make profit is. And we can imagine that in a new economy, one based not on profit, but on need, everyone would have jobs that not only sustain them, but provide their lives meaning. And who would lead these changes? Working people themselves, who already run the society, but in a socialist society would be able to run it in a way that actually makes sense. So while the task in front of us is large and may feel really overwhelming, we have every reason to believe that we can win. And this is not just a utopian dream. Working people are the overwhelming majority, and nothing about the organization of capitalist society benefits any of us. From a healthcare system that puts profits over patients, to neighborhoods that have absolutely no access to healthy foods, to children who go to school every day scared for their lives. This system works for no one. And it doesn't work for the planet either, which means there's the potential for everyone to come together for an issue that affects us all. The only thing that's not on our side is time. We have two outcomes before us: extinction or survival, which would mean socialism. We have everything to lose and a world to win.
Hi, my name is Remus. Thank you so much for bringing this information and those great presentations. I guess I have two questions. The first is that I just want to acknowledge that we're here on Ohlone land, and capitalism is the product of settler colonialism in America. That is one of the main ways that we extracted resources. And if you could speak to how you see the socialist movement partnering with the indigenous community and ways to support the First Nations that were here. And then my second question is how you see it most effective to reach out to oil workers or the workers in the fossil fuel industry. I am happy to have participated in the Chevron action that happened yesterday. It felt really good to be there, but it did not feel like there was any ability to interface with the workers there. And as somebody who's currently unemployed and not, part of a large company, what are ways that I might be able to help reach out to, other workers and try and engage with these ideas? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dee. I really like your presentation. I didn't know the problem was this severe. So you mentioned that the answer to this is socialism. And I just have a few observations. You mentioned that during the financial crisis, right, that the emissions only went down 1% because the system just runs on its own, basically, right, pretty much automatic. So if you want to bring an end to capitalism, I just have a few observations. When we say that businesses prioritize profits, it's because we account, the way that we do accounting in our entire society is through the monetary system, through money, right? So because our brain is designed for optimizing for certain results, right? We can say that capitalism is very evil, all that stuff. But it's because we're working for a particular type of accounting, right? And money is a very simple accounting system, right? Like say during the financial crisis, we say the economy tanked, but the amount of knowledge that we had, the total health of the population, the plants, right, the infrastructure, the amount of natural resources we have access to, what actually stayed the same, right? Before the crisis and after the crisis, what changes the numbers. Right, so we're always optimizing for bookkeeping, right? That's optimizing for profit. So would socialism be something like where we have a different type of accounting system, where we prioritize accounting for a different set of, I guess, measurements or numbers, right? Because I feel like our entire system or the way our mind is designed always optimizes for numerical results, right? So unless the bookkeeping changes, which I feel like is very important, right? Because if you don't change the bookkeeping system, you're keeping everything in terms of, we still track everything in terms of that accounting system, right? Capitalism, it's different. It's entirely based on financial accounting, right? Optimizing and maximizing that. So it doesn't really help live healthier lives, right? Because we have processed foods and we have we want to actually sell people products that make, like certain potato chips or Coca-Cola, for example, it has no aftertaste. So if you drink like 10 Coca-Cola in a day, every one tastes just as refreshing, right? So I mean, it's actually designed that way, right? So there's like, they do these things to make us eat. So the accounting system has to change, right? So my question is like, how would we do that? That's my question number one. Number two. Sorry. All right, I'm taking too much time.
We have the second round of questions.
Oh, okay.
Let's
Okay.
do one.
We can come back to it.
So the first question about how could a revolutionary society deal with or respond to the indigenous populations around the world? I think, well, first, what we see is if you look at the Dakota Access Pipeline, what we see is the continued need to take over more and more land, more and more resources, independent who lives there, independent of the people who live there, independent who depend on those lands, independent of the other species that live there as well. Capitalism has no problem doing this whatsoever. We see this with the Amazon. Part of the reason that the Amazon, the quantity of its acreage is burning is to create new farmland because the climate change is causing drought on other farmlands. So you could create new ones by destroying and burning the Amazon, and you see the displacement of people there. I think really socialists have always been, revolutionary socialists in favor of the right of self-determination, absolutely. So we would see that hopefully with this climate emergency, we would see a need to really reduce the quantity of land that we are destroying, the quantity of land that we are in any way taking over. There's plenty of the ability to do this, and I think hopefully it would really be the beginning of allowing people to live lives in a way that they determine themselves. So that's how I would see that interface, and I think this is the same fight. It's all of our lives that are at risk, whether you live. This is a fight where I think climate change, perhaps more than anything else, has a chance to unite struggles in a way that nothing could. You really are. There's really only two sides, and you're either in favor of, ending this destruction of our planet and our environment, or you want to see it continue, which I think the vast majority is on our side. And in terms of your question about workers in the oil industry or the extraction industries and how can people relate to them, I think this is a very important question, because what's interesting is as severe and as important that this problem is, that doesn't mean that that's going to be the one problem that somebody begins to engage on or become active on. Luckily or unluckily, capitalism produces problems on every aspect of our lives. And so maybe for a lot of oil workers, some of them will be absolutely immediately concerned with the environment and might want to engage on that question, but many of them could just be concerned about the question of speed up on their refineries, questions of injuries at work, questions of cost of living increases, and so on. And there's no reason why an organization can't begin to organize with people to fight against those sorts of things too. That's a lot of the work that we do. For example, some of the work is in the healthcare industry. We're not organizing in the healthcare industry around the question of climate change. That doesn't mean we don't bring it up and discuss it and encourage coworkers to go to it. We organize around day-to-day issues, sort of like divisions in the workplace, management constantly trying to divide people and so on. And when people begin to engage on those struggles and organize and fight and lead their own struggles there, it's not a big stretch to start to think about other struggles and how the real core issue is the same. It's the same system that's destroying our ability to live with our families and have time off and afford a cost of living is the same system that's destroying the environment. So I think there's a real opportunity for that kind of link. And in terms of doing more and more work like that, you could absolutely just talk to us at the end. Your question, if I understand it, I mean, I think I see it a little differently. I don't know. I think that the main difference between capitalism and socialism will not be the accounting system, in my opinion. Well, there will be a difference on that. The main difference will be the purpose of production, the very purpose of production. What is the purpose of production? Under capitalism, the purpose of production is profit. That's its purpose. There is no reason to produce anything if it doesn't make a profit. If corn is more profitable as a food for cattle, use it that way. If it's more profitable as a fuel, use it that way. If corn can be converted into sugar and then put into those poisonous, crappy foods that you talked about, that's more profitable. Let's do that. In fact, the most profitable foods that we see are the cheapest ones, which are the ones that are worst for us. So the function of profit, the function of production is profit. Under a socialist society, the purpose of production is need, not profit. We produce food because it's nutritious. We would produce things because they're necessary, because they could now reduce the carbon emissions, because of all of that would be the purpose of production. And you add on top of that, another purpose is to reduce the quantity of labor necessary for each individual. When you start to reduce the necessary labor by having higher levels of employment, by having new technology that can reduce the total quantity of labor in this society, that means mass unemployment and a greater surplus population. That means people living in slums, people who can never find work. That's what new technology means under capitalism. It's cheaper, it's profitable, it means less overall workers, which means more unemployment. Under a socialist society, that would mean less work can be distributed among more and more people, which could mean, in fact, that the real purpose of life is no longer just living so that you can go to work, but that you go to work so you can actually live, right? You can actually live. That is, the more and more people we have and the more efficient our technology is, the quantity of work can go down, down, down like a nice little asymptote and approach zero. I don't think it'll ever reach zero, but it can approach it. And what does that mean? That means what do we do with the rest of our time? We finally live our lives the way we want to live them. And I think that's a different purpose. It's how we would measure that is quantity of labor necessary. The more and more, the less labor required for individual, the more time we have to do other things. And the purpose of production is to really expand that. That's my opinion. Yeah.
I think, too, on the point of the oil workers, the goal is not to, plan a protest or a march to go stand outside a oil refinery to yell at workers to tell them, you guys need to change. The thing is, we're not against them, but we can be there alongside and with them to help them through, any sort of struggles. Like he was saying, are they struggling over job speed up or injuries on the job? And it's sort of building the confidence that they have to say, oh, actually, I should be able to decide this for myself, and I should be able to, actually engage in a struggle, win. And if I can win here at my job, why am I being told what to do in the rest of society as well? So it's to sort of, build the confidence of these workers that they're capable of controlling their lives themselves. And it's also clear that you can't just get rid of one industry. If oil workers decide this is BS, they're going to need to come into an economy that, is supportive of everyone so that they're not just left jobless, which means it's sort of the job of every single worker, in a socialist society to, run whatever industry that they work in the way that they know how to do it. So from hospital workers to teachers to transportation, every single part of the economy would change. It would not just be the destruction of one single industry. And as far as, how the human mind is optimized for certain accounting, human beings are incredibly adaptable. And yeah, a lot of us have adapted in some ways to capitalism. But imagine the sort of creative solutions that we could come up with if we were in a different sort of system where our lives weren't run by the amount of money in our bank account that dictated whether we get to eat tomorrow or whether, we let our children eat or we starve. So I think we can realize that, yeah, there are going to be some changes, but we don't even know what those would all be like yet, because we're still living under capitalism, where our everyday decisions are sort of dictated by things that are not fully in our control.
Let's say you had all the resources in the world to switch from the US, from a capitalist society to a socialist society. I'm just wondering what quantitative steps, what specific steps you would take. How would you try to transform the society, let's say 5 years, as much as you think you could?
So I was actually going to piggyback on what she said. So she actually brought up Elizabeth Warren, so you might as well throw Bernie into the conversation as well. That's pretty much it.
Thanks for the talk. That was good. One question that's always, that has been bothering me for a while is when the earlier socialist theoreticians, or when they were talking about socialism, their idea of socialism would be that you need abundance, right? We need to first produce enough for everyone to have a fully meaningful life before you could actually have the wealth to really share and to create the sort of foundation of socialism. Has to be a very advanced, productive society. So with the question of climate change, that's a real challenge, it seems like. Our actual productive capacity across the planet. Do we think that that's actually gonna go down, especially with the increasing technology, but the loss of farmland and the loss of sort of a global supply chain, is that gonna decrease production or is it gonna increase production? So how does this sort of, I know the future, we can't predict it, and we can't sort of say for certain what it's going to look like. But in the case that there will be a lower sort of baseline of products and things that we can survive on, what would socialism look like in that scenario?
Well, your first question, what would I do? And I don't mean this in the wrong way, but luckily, I wouldn't have to decide. Right? Luckily, in a new society that's really run in a democratic way, you would have the input of the vast majority of the population. You would have the input of the leading top scientists and so on. We would have the reins of the power of human technology and knowledge at our disposal, and we could do a lot. We could absolutely do a lot. But I think with regards, if your question is specific to the question of climate change, what would we do? I think we would immediately do what is absolutely necessary to bring down the emissions to that zero as fast as possible. We don't have a choice. That is number one. We inherit, a new society overnight inherits the crisis that capitalism has brought upon us. The crises of the climate, the crises of poverty, the crises of displacement, the crises and so on and so forth, the absolute inequality in access to the things we need to survive, and we would see that that's where we need to begin. And so I think we would start to see, take science itself. Right now, as was mentioned, you look at Cal or something like that, what research graduate proposals are funded? The first question is, do they support the energy industry? Do they support the military industry? To what degree are they profitable? We could see the begin to sort of prioritize the wealth of this society, investments into time, into real research on expanding the technologies we already have. Things like, absorbing carbon out of the atmosphere and turning it into products. Things like a reforestation. Things like solar, immediately producing solar in a more efficient way and rapidly phasing out all of fossil fuel production. It would mean the end of the automobile industry. It's gone. We would never have to produce another automobile, I think, ever again. And you'd start mass transit and real transportation. It would mean the end of the massive agriculture industry. All these monocrops where you're producing, thing after thing for no reason whatsoever. All of that would have to be converted into areas where you can have permaculture, where you're growing food in a way that's not for overproduction, not for where 50% of it is destroyed because you produce too much much of it, so that then you have to destroy it to bring down the quantity brought to market so the price doesn't go too low, so you don't lose some of your investments. So we could have agriculture that's produced for need that also absorbs carbon out of the atmosphere. But that would mean, again, the end of massive agriculture and the profitable industries. So we have so many things that we could implement already. And when you look at the question of housing, for example, in the United States, which isn't in any way close to the largest problem of housing, but we see it here, you have roughly 18 to 20 vacant units for every person who doesn't have a home. There's already an abundance of things. It's just not being used in those ways. That's not even to mention, they don't even include hotels and apartment buildings that have multiple units are still considered one big entire vacant unit. So the whole counting of this is plenty of problems already waiting to be solved. And maybe this connects to the question of scarcity and abundance, what you were asking. If we can't produce enough for people to survive, we can't have a society that lasts very long. You will see people compete and fight over resources. So abundance in the sense of, are we capable of producing what people need and meeting the needs and beyond those needs of the population? That hasn't changed one iota. That is absolutely true. But already the capacity to do that exists. So I don't want to keep repeating, but that 50% of food that's destroyed, that's enough to feed the world like 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 times over. And that's with their stupid methods of agriculture, right? That's already with their stupid methods of agriculture. We can do this in such a way where we're not trying to destroy people's quality of life, but it's a new question of quality of life. Quality of life doesn't have to mean you eat a salad that traveled 6,000 miles to get to you. I don't know if that's so wonderful. Quality of life doesn't mean you buy a new gadget every year that is planned for obsolescence in its own production. They build it in such a way that it deteriorates, whether it be the battery, whether it be all of these things are built into this overproduction and waste. Those things could be eliminated. And then on top of it, when you start to have education in a society that's finally guaranteed for people. Right now, if you get some kind of a bachelor's degree, you represent 1 or 2% of the world's population. That's because 98% of the population doesn't need an education because they're just destined to work in places where the owners don't think they need an education. Imagine when that starts to go up to 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 80, 90, 100%. The kind of society we can live in there is beyond our capacity for imagination, in my opinion, at this point. It's, a good science fiction author might be able to do it better. But at that point, it's that kind of potential that can be unleashed that could be a different kind of solution that we can't even begin to talk about. That is the kind of resources and technology and reorganization of society that population is able to implement will be very different and far better than anything I could sort of, imagine for you today, in my opinion. And maybe we could say something more about the questions about compared to Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, perhaps. And maybe one other thing to add is that I think it's important to say that what Bernie Sanders has done is acknowledge many of the things that many people have seen as so obvious, that the level of inequality is rising, that the threat to our environment is severe, that the corporations produce for a profit and they don't care about all else. They're pointing out things that people are starting to recognize, and that has increased the popularity around these politicians. And I think that's great. And I think it's also inspired many new activists. But if we were to look at what would it take to implement, let's just say, some of the main policies that many of them have talked about? Let's say completely fully funded governmental health care, right? That the real version of that would mean the bankruptcy, the end of, not the bankruptcy, the absolute end of the private insurance industries. They're gone, because what function do they play if you have a legitimate, fully funded healthcare system? It would mean the end of, in fact, the majority of the pharmaceutical industry, because so much of their profits are tied to this for-profit healthcare industry. So if their profits are gone, I don't know how they're going to fund all their nice research and investment, right? And so can that type of, roughly it's $4 trillion a year is the healthcare industry in the United States. That's not a small chunk. That's about 10% of the GDP of the U.S. Could that industry be eliminated by decree, by way of a congressional or presidential decree? It would be unprecedented, certainly. I'm not saying it's somehow impossible, but it's highly unlikely. It's never been done. The idea that the ruling class of this country would allow that, I don't think so. What they'll do is everything else to propose something that hangs on to their system, hangs on to their healthcare industry, and maybe gives people the illusion of what might be close to a single payer. The only way you could get something like is a massive social movement. So the idea that a president is necessary for a complete overhaul of the healthcare industry, it's not the question. The question is, what kind of movement are we able to build that forces those changes onto the to the ruling class? Only a massive movement that really, I think, would threaten revolution would be able to really make the kinds of changes that many of them speak to. Likewise, it's not impossible that you could see the $2 trillion roughly of student debt wiped away by presidential decree. But again, that's $2 trillion. That's not some small chump change that they're going to just wipe away. That means banks will suffer massive losses on their books. What will be the side effect of those massive losses suffered on their accounting books? Again, I think for a real victory like that, it would also take a social movement. And if we have a social movement that can win those sorts of things, why should we stop? Why should we stop at saying, oh, give us a new legislative change? We should go all the way and try to run the society in a way that actually has a future for ourselves. So I think we want way more than what these politicians offer us, and our pathway to getting them is to no longer rely on them, but to recognize that the power that we have, it relies upon us, with or without them.
Yeah, thanks again. This is awesome to get to have these kinds of conversations. My question is, if you see this as being the type of like critical mass which results in an event of revolution, like do we need to have this kind of overthrow moment, or are we able to achieve this change through more of like an emergence of alternatives? So in terms of like, I've been looking at like systems change theories where there's like individual actions, alternative actions, and then like trying to really change the structures that currently exist. So it sounds like a lot of what we're discussing is just like completely doing away with the existing structures, but is that like a mass movement that results in a single event, or is it the building of as many alternatives on a local level as we possibly can have until that allows us to sustain without using like the food system as it currently exists, or something like that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. One thing that I noticed listening to a lot of the people here is that it seems that one of the hardest things to do is develop a sort of consciousness or a way of sort of transcending the customs and the habits that you have living in a capitalist society, seemingly that we keep only thinking in that mode. And I was wondering, what are some ways that we can break our own habits and start thinking about more about needs-based, I guess it would be fulfillment other than production, you know, or I guess production for fulfillment. And basically just sort of, how do I say it? Trying to get around, like, yeah, like the ideas that we have, like our brains are wired a certain way, or this is the way it has to be, even if only is for custom, just like what are strategies for that? And not just for doing that, but also the custom of, waiting for top-down change. I think, how do we get not just people who are here, but other people who are just too accustomed to top-down change, things like electoralism and legislative change, how do we shift the perspective more towards community-based, sort of involved, more connected, less alienated sort of work that would sort of, I would say, get people in the mode of thinking that there are more possibilities and alternatives except besides capitalism?
I was just kind of wondering, maybe in relation to what you were saying earlier as well, like how do we go from the theory or all the ideas we've been talking about to putting all this in practice? As in, you've been mentioning that we need some kind of revolution, which would, well, then depend on a large part of society, I suppose, that would actually support these ideas and be willing to stand up for it and fight for it. But as far as I'm aware, there's still, like, we in this room might agree that this is something we want, but then there's the vast majority of people that is simply unaware that we are actually in an emergency and that we need the system to change, and that we simply can't continue this way. So I'm just kind of wondering, as much as I might agree with these ideas that we need all these things, like how are we actually going to go about achieving this? Is there kind of, I don't know. I'm just wondering how that would work, of organizing these mass amounts of people and actually making any of this happen.
If I understood it right, so the question that you asked was, so is there a difference between the idea of a complete overhaul to this system and a complete reorganization of the system from the majority of the people, a sort of seizure of power and really using the powers that we have in the society and the world, on the scale of the world, in the interests of the people who do the work and so on, versus could there be some kind of other method where you have perhaps a slow accumulation of new modes of production, co-op, new methods of using community space for food production and so on, and could that be a slow kind of incremental way of achieving a new society? This is an important question. I don't think it's a new question in a certain way. It's always been around since capitalism. For us, the question is, well, what is the new society that we're trying to produce? It's a society that is collectively run by the majority of the people themselves, right? That requires a level of self-confidence in themselves, a level of collectivity, a level of collaboration, and a democratic decision-making, right? And so our pathway to that actually is by increasing the level of organization of ordinary people and fighting in this society and fighting for things that matter towards us. In fact, what we see is capitalism has a little bit of room for, non-competitive niches to emerge of a community garden, a community farm, a workers' co-op. But if Chevron workers were to declare themselves a workers' co-op, that would be a declaration of civil war, and you would see the National Guard and the police and the military arrive the very next day and march upon and seize the equipment, probably fire the majority of the workers and replace them with whether it's the army or somebody else. So you have a state in this society that is very clear on its purpose, very clear on its function, which is to maintain this system at all cost. And so we don't think that you can have a kind of slow incremental. It's either irrelevant in the sense that it doesn't in any way get in the way of the sort of profit functioning of this system, and thereby it's tolerated, or the moment it becomes relevant is the moment you see what the society really is based upon, which is a war, a class war. And for us, in order to participate in that war, we have to be organized, and the only way we can really win is if we're the ones on a scale of the world seizing power and making the decisions ourselves collectively and democratically. So I don't think we could, unfortunately, win on a sort of incremental basis. And the question of how do we change ourselves, if I understood that, sort of change your mind, I don't think it's a matter of thinking more collectively and so on. I don't think it's a matter of creative thinking or a sort of mental exercise. It's the experiences we have in our lives that change our minds, right? And so really we see the only kind of antidote to the hardened individualism of this society are social movements. You really see people who can change in 24 hours. If you look at somebody like Greta, who she was before and who she is now. If you look at some of the high school students who've been going to these protests for the first time in their lives, they can be changed in a day just by going to this, by seeing the number of people. Now you have an experience that begins to transform your sense of what's possible, what's hopeful. Now you have to reinterpret your whole entire, assessment of what's possible for you in your life based upon these new experiences. Without those, we would be stuck in the experiences of ordinary society. And I think really the kinds of people we can become aren't going to be fully developed, fully complete in a sense in this society ever. We are disgusting versions of our real potential, I think. Who we truly can be would be in a different society. When you're born into a society where you don't have to think about food, we don't have to think about housing, where you don't have to think about divisions of inequality and so on, of all the poisons of this society, then we can see a different kind of way of thinking, I think, emerge. Yeah, yes. I mean, you could begin to think differently, of course. You know, you could understand the way and start to take action, but that's the beginning of a process that wouldn't be fully completed unless we succeed. And the question of sort of the gap between the opinions of the vast majority, who absolutely, whether they may not be aware yet of the severity of climate change, whether they may think that, you know, socialism, a revolution, that's fantasy, it's not happening, that's why we should just vote for whoever the next politician, whatever the case may be. There is a huge gap between what we're proposing and what the perspective of the majority of the population is. But it's our perspective that there's two things that need to be done. Even if we had a social movement, there's no guarantee that it's going to succeed. Real organizations have to be built, and we can do that in the meantime. We can do that today. We can find the people who already see the world and see how severe the problems are and want to fight it in spite of just wanting to integrate into the society. Some people just want to join the society and carry out what their parents have proposed to them, which is get the better life that you can get, and that's good enough. That would be a sign of achievement. Other people, for whatever reason, are beginning to see that that's not enough. You know, as we quoted Greta, what kind of future am I studying for if there isn't even a future that I can have? Those people can begin to become organizers, not just participants, not just spectators, but organizers, people who can figure out how to reach out to people in their classrooms, at their workplaces, and so on. And you need to build an organization out of people who want to do that, there is work ready to be done right now, plenty of it. And if those kind of organizations can be built, then we can see perhaps a different perspective can intervene in these movements that won't just accept the promises. Because when you see a mass movement emerge, you will see a couple of responses. One, they'll try and crush it, or two, they'll promise it everything. Oh, go home, we got this now. We have the new legislation, you can just vote for it, you can get out of the streets, we promise it'll all work out fine now. And that's what it'll try to do, and it's without organizations proposing a different perspective in those moments, we won't even see the potential for a real systemic change emerge. So I think through struggles, people's perspective of what's possible and necessary will change, and we don't have to sort of, it's not, in our opinion, it's not even possible to kind of, you know, shake people into activity. This society will do that for them. The problems of this society will pose the question to people no matter what. Luckily or unluckily, I don't think we have to do that. Capitalism promises, I think, increased misery for more and more people, and that's going to catapult more and more people into action, and more social movements will hold out an antidote for people to begin to engage in the process, I think, in my opinion.
Thank you all for holding this panel tonight. I'm just curious about the socialist movement, because in certain countries, when we think about the socialist movement, it starts off with a war between the government and the people. And I'm trying to see, how do you all see that ideology being different if that was taking form in America? Would it be war on the American soul amongst like soldiers, because most of the time in social society, that's what it ended up coming to be, or either social societies end up playing a role in capitalism, where then we also see that, yes, they have this overall goal, they promise this to the people, and then overall it's like certain people getting the money, certain people getting the products, certain people are doing these things. I'm trying to see, would America having a history that it does, if a socialist movement was to move forward, what does those steps look like? And also I think with the socialist movement, because I think it's a great theory, but I feel with more and more people trying to be in unison, like I think we have to address to talk to each other and not at each other, because I think these conversations are important. However, some people, as you know, some people walked out, seemed like the answer, but I think we have to be uncomfortable and comfortable in these situations, because if we're thinking about 2050, there's only like 30 years left, so how soon do we really have to finally figure out, like, we can't be upset because we're calling each other out or we're having these difficult conversations? I'm thinking holistically, how are we trying to address these issues? From a small example, Rwanda banned plastic. Like, how can the Bay Area ban plastic? Like, we don't use plastic. What are our other options, because we only have so much longer? And I think right now we're trying to show who the most elite or this and that, and it's just, we're basically dying, and we're worrying about being uncomfortable because we're being addressed. So I'm just trying to see how can the socialist movement include, not exclude, and not bring war amongst the people here.
Thank you, everybody who presented, and thank you, everybody, for your comments. I feel like what I hear a lot of people saying is, what can we do, what to do? We have heard about the problems probably many more times than just tonight. So everybody here is probably thinking, how can we do something about it? And I think that, to me, the most important thing, and the reason why we put events on like this, is because we want to be very explicit about what we think we should be doing. And I know that it feels like what we're saying is a pretty big thing. Let's just completely get rid of the social system that has been in existence for now over hundreds of years. But what we're actually saying is more simple than that, is that we have to start somewhere. And everybody in this room can start somewhere, wherever it is that you are. I'll give you just a brief example. I go to school in San Francisco State, and because none of my classmates were going to be able to participate in any of the demonstrations on Friday the 20th, when thousands and thousands of people were going to be out, I proposed that we should do a small presentation at school where we were going to be talking about similar things that we were discussing here today. And what I got was a very positive response where people were saying, this is so great, because one, I wasn't going to be able to participate. Some people said, I didn't even know this was happening. 3, I'm typically too depressed to do anything about this. And 4, you gave us a broader perspective about the problem, that it's not just this problem that I can recycle my way out of, but it's actually something that we need to think more broadly about the system. And I also talked about many, not to put a plug, but many of these movements that have happened in the past that show us the possibility that people have to change, and connected it to the potential that I see that we have today, looking at these high schoolers, looking at all the people that can come out into the streets and say, we're tired of having our life be in peril because of the interest of a minority. So I think we have to think really closely about where we are, who we're connected to, and how we can just start doing something where we are. It's not go out into the streets and call thousands and thousands. That might not be the way each and every one of us can do something, but every single one of us can do something.
Yeah, I think I appreciate a lot of the questions and comments that people have made. I think one thing that we all need to recognize is that we've all learned to tolerate a lot. And at a certain point, people will start to say, I remember there were people in the South said, you know, I'm just tired of being tired. And at a certain point, people look around and they start to see that kind of attitude, we're not going to take it anymore, and it's infectious. The problem is, quite often when we see mass movements, we move into those new circumstances with a changed consciousness, with an awareness, but we still have the same tools that we're living with right now. We have to look beyond. And I think, you know, it's interesting to be able to look at a 16-year-old from Sweden who says, very plainly, we have to listen to science. We have to pay attention to science. And science just isn't the CO2 in the atmosphere, what will happen when the permafrost melts, and methane. There is a science of human society as well. And if we don't look at our history and see all the movements that have taken place, then and what the problems were, what the pitfalls were, what the shortcomings were, if we don't look at that, we're doomed to failure. Because that's what science is. It's analyzing things and then stepping over those past mistakes and moving on. And we have those opportunities. We look at Algeria today, where they've toppled a regime. We look at Egypt a number of years ago, where the regimes, these fixed regimes, were toppled. And then where do they end up? And then people can say, see, nothing can change. Well, that's possible. But we've seen also other times when you're organized and you're ready to put forward a perspective that can go beyond the traps that we're used to living in, then we can start to see the possibility, There is no guarantee, but the possibility of real change. And that's the moment we're in right now. We're in one of these periods where we can be enheartened, we see people in the streets, but we also are in a trough in terms of the real social struggles that are taking place. We can begin to take advantage of that time, a relatively quiet time, to build organizations, to build revolutionary organizations that aren't self-appointed leaders, but are comprised of people who are willing to stand up, put forward a perspective at the time when it's going to resonate. That can mean having a little teach-in at your school. At this moment, you're not going to be calling for a revolution at San Francisco State. You could, but who cares? So we have a lot of possibilities. I listened to a lot of sort of questions about assurances. What we're left with, and I really mean left with, when we look at this climate disaster that we're facing, what we're left with depends on what we do today. It's not what we decide to do in 4 years, 5 years. It's really, I think, sort of very hopeful to think that we'll be actually struggling still in 2030, given what we've seen. But we can't say, oh God, we can't make it. What we do now will have an impact. Greta had no idea the kind of impact that she was going to have. No one did, but just watch her evolution now, and that she speaks for an entire generation, but yet to get organized.
All right, as to the question about, the possibility of some sort of war if we were to, bring about socialism, I think we don't really get to necessarily decide if there's something like that or not. I think what we do know is that the people who are in power now and those who profit from the way the economy runs now are probably going to fight to maintain it that way and are not going to be okay with just letting go of control. So whether, that looks like a war or looks like something else. And as far as having soldiers or the U.S. military on our side, the U.S. military is absolutely huge, the largest in the world. But you also have to think about where a majority of the people in the military or soldiers coming from. A lot of them are coming from poor and working neighborhoods, and the military is often, a path in life that allows them to sort of escape the poverty that they're in, or it gives them, some larger purpose for themselves. And, in a time of social revolution, how many of them are going to go on to the side of the people who, are wanting to maintain this economy for their own interests? And how many of them are going to go over to the side of the people in their neighborhoods, the people from the communities that they come from? How many of them are going to be on the side of, a majority of people? So I think definitely not all of them will be on our side, but if a time comes where there is, some sort of civil war or something in the social struggle, I think the chance that a lot of these people are going to fight for where they actually come from and the people that they know is pretty good.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add, except I think one thing we can see is we have to be, as much as we have to be urgent, because it's a very urgent problem, that can't get in the way of patience with people. You have to still be patient with people and not see people who don't agree with you or aren't interested in some way as the enemy or something like this. We have a lot of things in common to discuss with people. We don't have to begin to discuss the things where we disagree. We need to discuss the disagreements, but we have to find the way to work with people in spite of these disagreements. This happens all the time within the working class, at the workplaces and so on, is that you may not have agreements with your coworkers, but nonetheless on, on this or that issue, but you have to find the things where you have commonalities and you can begin to organize in spite of those differences. And in fact, many of the differences or divisions we might see may not be fully overcome, and they don't necessarily all have to be overcome in advance. They might have to take a completely different kind of movement and so on where they really get addressed. So I think really we have to be patient. We can't think that there's something special about us and be elitist because we have this goal and others don't. You might as well give up before you begin if you start that way. Not to say that that's what you were proposing in the least. But I don't think it's easy. But I guess the one thing I would say is I don't know. I don't think we can debate whether we have till 2030 in 2 days, or 2030 in a month, or 2030 in a year. We have no idea in terms of the exactitude of that sort of thing. What we know is that it's true. If we look back 10 years from now and we say, why didn't we begin then, we would be foolish. We know enough. We know more than enough already. And in a way, it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of silly, but so many people have been, raised in this generation in the U.S. where you see all these, films about sort of, oh, do you want to fight to save the world? And it really feels like that now. It really feels like we're sort of potentially the last ones on the planet, those of us alive today who have this chance to try, and we would be completely fools if we didn't make the most of it, because we really can succeed, and we can actually win. And so I really encourage all of you to join us in this fight. Thank you.